Welcome to part 1 of Science and Witchcraft. In this episode, we'll discuss the intersection of science and witchcraft and how neuroscience and psychology influence my practice as an atheist witch. This is going to be a 2-part episode. This is a really important topic, and it's fundamental to my practice and my worldview, so I want to leave enough time to delve into this topic without veering too far from my typical episode format. Please note that while I am an intensely curious mind, I am not an expert. I am not a physicist or a neuroscientist, nor am I purporting these concepts as universal truths. What I am doing is exploring the front lines of scientific research and pondering what possibilities are available to me and to my understanding of our universe. I'll focus on the ideas I find most fascinating, but this is by no means an exhaustive review. I encourage you to continue exploring, and I have included some resources in the show notes. Let's talk about discretion. Yeah, we're talking about discretion again. When you explore these topics with respect to witchcraft, it's very common to encounter pop science that borders on misinformation. It's important to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism. After all, if I consider myself a reasonable skeptic and a concept makes sense to me, I'll be a lot more comfortable fitting that topic into my own worldview. My open mind keeps me learning, and my discretion keeps me grounded. Of particular importance is to vet your sources and vet your sources' sources. In the words of my good friends, anyone can write a book. So why does science matter at all in witchcraft? Fundamental to my beliefs is the notion that at some point in our past, magic consisted of things that are perfectly normal to us now. Consider electricity, gravity, or astronomy. I am entirely certain that many, if not all, of the unexplained phenomena we observe today will eventually be explained by human science and understanding, provided we don't eliminate ourselves first. Let me make a quick note on this. It has been suggested to me that this logic could be used to justify some beliefs that are kooky at best and scary at worst. Let me be very clear. I am not suggesting that anyone reject scientific fact or proven concepts. In fact, I am suggesting quite the opposite. I'm keeping an open mind about theories that are yet to be proven. Most of what I'll discuss today are scientific theories. I love to learn about these as possible explanations for the unknown and for the things that I observe in my life and in my practice. In essence, this is how a self-described atheist can also take witchcraft in any way seriously. Some of this information is generalized for the purpose of fitting it into a relatively short podcast episode. And another thing to keep in mind is that theories and our understanding continue to grow and evolve, so I fully expect and hope to revisit this topic from time to time in future episodes. I often say that witchcraft is spicy psychology. Witchcraft is inherently a mental practice whereby we take control of ourselves in order to grow. So let's explore this by discussing some scientific concepts in psychology and neuroscience. We'll start with biofeedback. Biofeedback is an alternative medicine technique whereby patients are prompted to consciously control involuntary functions in their bodies. Think breathing, heart rate, or body temperature. This suggests that our conscious selves have a lot more control over our brain and our bodies than maybe we previously thought. So there's a well-known example of this, Tibetan monks who practice tumo, or inner fire. It's one of the most sacred spiritual practices in the Indo-Tibetan traditions. Practitioners have honed their control of their own physical bodies such that they can use a combination of breathing and meditation techniques to increase their body heat in extreme cold. And in fact, clinical studies of biofeedback and similar techniques have actually shown individuals who could increase their hand temperature by 11.7 degrees Celsius, which is not insignificant. Next, I'd like to talk about instinct and intuition. Instinct is a hardwired, direct response to a stimulus or situation. Intuition, on the other hand, is how we arrive at a conclusion without any obvious reasoning. You may hear the term gut feeling. Well, gut feelings are a very real connection between our gastrointestinal tract and our brain. This creates a complex feedback loop that works in both directions. And you may not know that your intuition is trainable. Information processing takes place as two parts. One is a slow and deliberate process, and the other is automatic and quick, and that's our intuition. It's theoretically possible to train your intuition by prioritizing it, learning how it feels, and then taking note of your intuitive moments and your dreams. I'd like to make a quick note about the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Test. This is a personality test type assessment based on Jungian philosophy, and it purports to measure intuition. Researchers have unfortunately demonstrated that Myers-Briggs lacks testability and thus does not meet theoretical criteria, so please don't think that it's a great method of measuring intuition. However, I mentioned taking note of your intuitive moments and dreams, so I'd like to talk a little bit more about dreams. So everybody dreams, and not everyone remembers their dreams, and dreams are subject to change throughout our lives based on our age and events in our lifetime. People dream differently from each other. So, for example, visually impaired individuals tend to have fewer visual dream impressions compared to sighted individuals. So why do we dream, and what do they mean? Well, theories suggest that dreams are the reprocessing that occurs while our brain is consolidating learning and memories from our conscious moments, helping us to develop our cognitive capabilities and creating kind of a safe space where we can process things that might otherwise be a little overwhelming. Noting and analyzing our dreams may offer us a glimpse into otherwise suppressed thoughts or emotions. We do tend to forget about 95% of our dreams within just a few moments of waking up. So if this avenue of self-exploration interests you, I highly recommend a dream journal. Keep it at your bedside so that you can write down your dreams when you wake. And it doesn't need to be detailed. Just write down enough description to trigger the memory of the dream after it fades. So another good segue, thinking about memory, I like to talk about the power of scent and memory. Our sense of smell is handled by the olfactory bulb of the brain, and because our neural pathways are structured the way that they are, information about odors travels through our limbic system, which includes the hippocampus. That's the part of our brain responsible for processing memory. Flavor, at least your nuanced depth of flavor outside of your basic sense of taste, is actually your sense of smell. So complex flavors are subject to the same memory association as scents. And as a result of this whole neural structure, our sense of smell and flavor are inherently tied to memory. You may have experienced a moment where you smelled a smell and it brought back a very vivid memory. Well, you've experienced this for yourself. And in a similar vein, have you ever noticed that how for most people, smells and emotions have color? Color itself is created in our brains based on the way that our eyes interpret light. It's also affected by our mental state in the way that depressed individuals tend to see in more grayscale and happier individuals tend to see brighter colors. Color can be a really powerful tool to help adjust our moods and our behavior. And in witchcraft, we often adhere to color correspondences in spellcraft. And this actually has a pretty firm basis in psychology, and it can be a powerful tool for evoking a desired emotion or mental state during spell working or ritual. Next, I'd like to talk about subconscious memory, also called implicit memory. It's often created as a state-dependent memory, which means it's tied to a place, mindset, or activity. Implicit memories can be positive or negative, and unfortunately are often created as a result of a traumatic experience, but they're usually inaccessible through normal cognition, and this is assumed to be a protective mechanism. Subconscious memory can affect our everyday thoughts and behaviors. You may hear the term shadow work, and the practice of shadow work involves working to shift our subconscious memory and our related reactions. We'll talk a lot more about shadow work in future episodes. One of the ways in which we can, shift the memories, or especially shift the reactions, is through something called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity and rewiring of our brain using conscious intention and mindfulness is a very powerful tool. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural pathways. Humans are able to slowly influence the construction of these pathways deliberately through focused effort over a long period of time. So shadow work also involves this level of mindfulness and repetitive thinking in order to effectively rewire our brains. Next, I'd like to discuss consciousness, and this is going to come up in part 2 as well. I think all of us can agree that we are, in fact, conscious. So, what are you? As in you, the pilot of the bone and meat golem that you're driving around on this rock flying through space. Everyone innately understands that they are conscious, but as yet no one has been able to explain why. Of particular interest to a lot of people is, does our consciousness persist after death? So theories on this are everywhere, from quantum physics to a theory called the conscious electromagnetic field theory, or SEMI, which theorizes that the consciousness is actually produced by the brain's electromagnetic field. And we'll talk a little bit more about electromagnetism in the next episode. So that might have felt like a very quick science lesson with a whole lot of different topics, and you may be wondering why we care about any of this. So in my practice, I use every one of these concepts to influence my body, my brain, and my perceptions. And I can use this to control the outcomes of spells and rituals. I can tap into my subconscious for signals that my conscious brain hasn't noticed, and I can generally use these to improve my life. After all, if not this, then why practice witchcraft at all? In future episodes, we'll discuss the use of such tools as meditation, implicit memory, colors, scents, and sounds in witchcraft. So, as mentioned, this episode is foundational to episodes to come. I'll be referencing this and building on these concepts continually. As always, please feel free to comment directly on the episode with questions or reach out to me via email or social media. Next up, part 2 of our Science and Witchcraft episode. Please also keep an eye out for the very first of a series of bonus episodes this year about the Sabbats. So I'll be releasing a bonus episode about the upcoming holiday in bulk. Thank you for joining me today for part 1 of Science and Witchcraft, and I'll see you next time. In the last episode, we discussed the relationship between science and witchcraft, and how neuroscience plays a role in my practice as an atheist witch. In this episode, we'll continue by discussing the physical universe and theoretical science. Get ready for another quickfire episode of scientific learning. We'll start with the physical universe. The standard model of particle physics at this time assumes that all matter is made of a few basic building blocks called fundamental particles, which are governed by 4 fundamental forces. So currently, this is the most widely accepted description of the subatomic world, but it's not complete. And it doesn't explain all questions, like, what is dark matter? We'll talk about the research that's being done to try to describe the answers to some of those questions. One of those four fundamental forces that I mentioned is electromagnetism, which is the physical interaction among electric charges, magnetic moments, and electric fields. So there's another theory out there. It's called the electric universe theory, and it is the concept that electromagnetism is the foundational force of our universe rather than gravity. I should note that this theory is hotly debated, far from accepted, and it turns a lot of accepted theory on its head, but it is still interesting to note. Let's talk a little bit more about electromagnetic theory in general. So electromagnetic waves are electromagnetic energy moving through the universe, typically thought of as light or radiation. As expected, this has a proven impact on humans. Applied to the brain, it can relieve depression, but too much obviously can kill. So Einstein first suggested that electromagnetic radiation is released in packets, which are now called photons, that behave like waves. This theory is now called wave-particle duality and is generally well supported. Another type of wave in the universe is a sound wave. Sound waves are waves that travel through a physical material, like air or water, unlike electromagnetic waves. They also move a little bit differently, parallel to the source, while electromagnetic waves like light travel perpendicularly to the source. Plenty of sound waves are not actually detectable by human ears, or are perhaps only subconsciously detectable. So those that are not obvious to us have been theorized as the cause for a lot of supernatural encounters. As we noted in the last episode, subconscious signals or subconscious memory sometimes cannot be consciously recollected from the brain, and so we may come up with other explanations for our reactions to these subconscious triggers. There's been an interesting popular science experiment that shows that music can change water's molecular structure based on frequency. This is really interesting when you consider that humans are mostly water, and this might have some applications in medical science. Another interesting facet to electromagnetic energy is the human energy field, or HEF. Human hearts actually produce a significant electromagnetic field that extends outside the body. It's produced through cardiac torsion, which is during the beating of the heart, and it can actually be measured with very sensitive instruments called superconducting quantum interference devices, or SQUIDs. These are the most sensitive instrument for detecting electromagnetic energy currently available. So there are a lot of unproven theories around the human energy field, but in general these conceptualize the impact of our heart rate on the field and its interaction with other humans and our environment. Research on this continues in multiple disciplines, including medicine, physics, and alternative healthcare. What we've talked about thus far are, more or less accepted theories about the physical universe. I'm going to change tack a little bit and talk more about the theoretical universe. We'll start with quantum physics. Quantum physics is literally just teeny tiny physics. It's the study of the very smallest objects in nature where previously understood laws of physics just don't apply. A key concept to understand in quantum physics is that light and matter can behave as waves and particles, depending on how we measure them. Quantum mechanics are based on probability. They predict certain outcomes instead of being able to precisely measure. So it's not necessarily random or unpredictable, it's just based on probability and mathematical formulae. In the study of physics, when objects either get way too big or way too small for us to study them using direct experiments, we rely on math instead. A fundamental theory of quantum mechanics is called superposition. Particles can exist in multiple states at one time, and their state is unknown until it's observed. This is actually where the famous Schrodinger's cat thought experiment originates, whereby a cat in a box is simultaneously alive and dead until the box is opened. It's a somewhat morbid idea of this superposition, or the concept that something can exist in multiple states at one time until observation. Observation collapses the wave function. And I should note, it does not actually need to be a conscious observer, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in relation to consciousness itself. But most often, this is actually observed by a measurement device, and that has nothing to do with human consciousness. Another topic that comes up pretty frequently is called quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is two particles that are linked such that their quantum states cannot be independent of each other, regardless of how far apart they are. A fun, if unrealistic, usage of this concept, along with the multiple dimensions described in string theory, is in the book The Three-Body Problem, and it was recently made into a Netflix show, and I do recommend it. So I just mentioned string theory. Let me talk a little bit about string theory and M theory, which is an evolution of string theory. String theory is a wonderful example of my greatest reason for having an open mind. It's mathematical in nature, it's incomplete, but it is not disproven either. The key concept of string theory is that all objects in the universe are made of vibrating filaments or strings of energy. Later on, this was expanded to include membranes, or brains for short. So another remarkable facet of string theory is that it seeks to unify all fundamental forces known to science into a single framework. It also attempts to marry the theories of quantum physics with relativity. Interestingly, although string theory is based off of the concept of multiple dimensions, it has a hard time explaining space-time. Cool, so why do we care about quantum physics or string theory? The reason I mention this in the Science and Witchcraft episode is that popular science often uses quantum mechanics and string theory to tease concepts like time travel, parallel universes, and multiple dimensions. More importantly, this area of research is evolving into debate and theory on the nature of consciousness and a person's subjective experience. And for me, the most interesting thing about this is what would happen in human research if all of nature was explainable in a single framework? What would we go on to learn next? So what? Another science lesson, but what exactly are we trying to explain here in this episode? As I said in a previous episode, most of what we observe in our universe can be broken down to particle physics. We are biology. Biology is chemistry. Chemistry is teeny tiny physics, and as it turns out, teeny tiny physics is math. So many, many great mysteries of history were seen as magical and then later explained by scientific reasoning. So naturally, I expect that a lot of our currently observed phenomena will eventually be explained by science. So why not right now? I hope that humanity never sees the day where we've fully explained the entire world, because it's such a drive to human development and human nature to be constantly theorizing, testing, and exploring. If you're still not sure what this has to do with witchcraft, my practice incorporates a lot of what we've described here in these two episodes. And I will have additional episodes about things like the law of attraction, the power of manifestation. And an important facet of my practice is to actually employ the scientific method. I hypothesize, experiment, and postulate continuously. I view my practice as experimental in nature, taking copious notes and following up on results. And through this, I've learned a lot about how to impact and influence myself and my world. And I believe that only through trying, failing, and trying again can I begin to discern any actual truths about myself or about the universe. So thank you for joining me for the second episode, or the second part of Science and Witchcraft. I hope you have found this interesting, and I am looking forward to building on some of these foundational concepts in future episodes. In the meantime, please look out for that bonus episode I mentioned about Imbolc. It'll be the first of 8 Sabbat bonus episodes in 2025. And then look out in 2 weeks for the next episode, Witchy Basics as an Atheist. Thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you next time. The best way to support this podcast is to please like, subscribe, or leave a review. Follow or message me on Insta at @anatheistwitch, or email me your comments and questions at anatheistwitch@gmail.com.